We are live. Hey, Marcy.
Maybe.
Hey, everybody. While we're waiting for a few people to join us, and we will be introducing our guest shortly. Today's episode is about um, what is it? We're going to be discussing sexuality and healing from purity culture. We do have a special guest with us, and I'll be introducing him soon. Um, but just for the sake of disclaimers, we will be discussing topics that are not typically suitable for children. It is up to you if you want your children present, but I suggest that if you have small children, to escort them out the room or put earbuds in. I told my 13-year-old today, I was like, look, you're 13. You need to learn about this stuff. We're going to be talking about abuse a little bit. So, up to you if you want to hear it. Don't know if you want to hear your mom talk about this stuff because usually he tunes in. But with that, we're going to go ahead and run our intro while we wait for more people.
Welcome to Umbrella Rebellion. I'm Marcy.
And I'm Dee.
We are finding healing after leaving a cult.
We will be discussing abuse and personal experience with the ATI, IBLP, and fundamental churches.
Trigger warning. This podcast may contain descriptions of various forms of abuse. Please take care for your safety and well-being while you are listening.
If the content becomes too much for you to handle, please turn this off. We hope to expose harmful teachings that lead to and justify abuse,
with the hope that those that are experiencing abuse can find support and escape from it.
All right. So I would like to introduce our guest now. We have a psychotherapist and certified sex therapist, Marc Prevette, and he is going to be joining us. Hey, Marc.
Hi, y'all. How you doing?
Hey.
Doing great. It's a wonderful Tuesday evening.
Yes, it is. It's starting to cool off here, at least.
So, for our audience sake, would you like to kind of just do a little introduction of who you are and what you do and your specialties and how you go about discussing these topics?
Sure. So my name's Marc Prevette. I am a licensed psychotherapist. I am a certified sex therapist. I'm actually do supervision for sex therapy, getting their certifications. Clinical supervisor for licensure, national board counselor. Oh, so many things. Been doing this now for well over a decade. What got me into this is, since I'm the only certified sex therapist with at least an hour away from an organization that does not have a religious affiliation, I do get a little bit more, I guess you could say, a little bit more wider variety, and I have a lot more other exposure to different elements of it. I've worked in three hospital settings, community care settings, private practice, spoken in universities. I teach intro to sex therapy. I mean, I just keep going.
Keep adding stuff and adding stuff and adding stuff.
Yes.
And you're working on your doctorate, aren't you?
That is correct. I am currently working on my PhD in human sexuality studies with a specialization in sex therapy. I am entering my third year. So it is something I'm currently working on. So hopefully by 27, I'll officially catch up to my wife and be able to call myself doctor. So we'll see. But yeah,
That's awesome.
It's been a fun journey. So
yeah. And Mark and I met in a veterans group. We're both veterans, and we've gotten to know each other a little bit. And when I was thinking about episodes and stuff, I reached out to him and I was like, "Hey, I would really love to do an episode on this, and you're an expert." So we could really use an expert because I don't feel like I'm really qualified to talk about some of the things that people want answers about in our community. Um, so thank you all for that are here either on Facebook and YouTube. One of these days, I will figure out how to stream on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok all at the same time, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah, I already see two people I know already in the chat. Hey, Katie. Yeah.
So, yeah, we really appreciate you being here. So, our episode today is about we're just going to be talking about sexuality, sexual relationships, healing from the purity culture, coming out of that. How do we um deal with that kind of stuff? What are the journeys look like? And I did ask a question in a couple of our recovery groups on Facebook, and we got some really awesome questions specifically for Mark. Now, caveat: we have a lot of content. We may not be able to get to it all in this hour, but Mark has said
Yes.
that we may be able to do a second episode. So
When
if we run out of time,
Yep.
we will book him for another episode here shortly. So Marcy and I are trying to get back into doing at least one recorded episode a month and one live a month. I have an episode to edit. It's just been taking me a really long time. I'm so out of practice. Okay, so let's dive into this topic. So first, some of the common things that I have dealt with, that I have talked to survivors about when you're coming out of the purity culture, some of the things that we deal with, right? We've got the guilt, the shame, figuring out like what to dress in, you know, um, that kind of stuff. And then so a lot of times for like us women, is being a woman itself brings on the shame of just being the, I guess, punching bag for all of the problems in our culture, right? Um,
Yeah.
and then let's see, some of the other things I kind of noticed in the responses was our purity was always equated to our value, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then how the sexual repression affects the development through our teenage years, young adulthood, and then not having a sense of normality, which in a lot of cases, normal doesn't exist. But as a survivor, you always feel like you are way outside the norm, right? And that can be very, very difficult when we're healing from uh, the teachings and stuff that we were taught about sexuality and stuff and purity. It can also affect future relationships. There's a lot of things to navigate, especially when there's abuse involved. A lot of people, when they're leaving, they're in their early to mid 20s. And so there's kind of like a developmentally like stunted growth that we have sometimes. Um, Lack of personal boundaries. We don't learn personal boundaries in the cult. So understanding that boundaries are okay is very difficult. um, Unable to find pleasure in sex or relax enough to enjoy it. That's very, very common. Yes, Phantom, we actually will be taking some questions from the chat. We want to address some of the questions that we have already. But if you want to go ahead and ask your questions when we get to that segment, we'll pull your question up and if there's too much chat, I might ask you to put it back in there if I can't find it. Um, and then a lot of times they in the culture, they talk about every man's battle, right? Like men are just sexual in nature. It's a need that they have. And they battle to stay pure, um, which can lead to problems with lust and, porn addiction or sexual addiction, stuff like that. I mean, it can happen for women too, but it's more like it's preached that the men have a pass, right? Like that happens very commonly. Um, Lack of knowledge about anatomy. That's a huge one. Like there are some women who leave the culture or get married and they have absolutely no idea what their body is supposed to do and what it can do and where the pleasure centers are. it's it's definitely a learning curve, and it just depends on your education, right? And some people who aren't in the cult don't have that knowledge either. So um and then we have people who have issues with uh medical issues like pelvic floor dysfunction or vaginismus and stuff like that. We will kind of, if we have time and we can get to it, we will try and touch on that topic. The hypocrisy of the purity culture, that they cover up abuse and then they blame the women for the faults of men, the sins of man, um and then they don't own up or take responsibility or
Yeah.
give appropriate consequences for the abuses that happen. But when someone falls, especially a woman, it's a huge grave sin, right? And there's lots of consequences for the women, not so much for the men. Just depends. It's rare. And then there's guilt about masturbation and pleasuring yourself and stuff like that. And then coming out of it, you can have the extremes of hypersexuality or hyposexuality, right? Like not wanting it at all, or like, oh gosh, I got to get some, right? um, oh, okay. That's a really good question. We will
Really good question.
definitely get to that. All right, Marcy, do you have anything else you would like to kind of add to that?
I not really. I think my only thought in the middle of that was that this when you're coming out of it, the safety factors of, like, you already covered boundaries, but um, I think a lot of us didn't know safety boundaries either with it.
Right, that
Yeah,
you are allowed to be safe in those environments, right? Like
yeah,
it wasn't just whatever
hmm
the other person wanted.
yeah.
Right.
There's just a level of naivety that led to unsafe practices.
Definitely. Yeah.
Um so uh one of the things that came up was, and we kind of talked about this just a little bit, or I did, the obsession with purity culture that causes others to be obsessed with sex, right? And
Mhm.
this can lead to promiscuity and taking chances. It can, unsafe sex practices. It can also lead to the abuses that we see in the culture, in the churches where minors are being abused, where women are taken advantage of, where men and boys are being taken advantage of and groomed, and that kind of stuff. And we have survivors that from the IBLP who were groomed by Bill Gothard. And it's just, when you look back at how much they focused on purity
Yeah.
and what came from it, it's just so, like we said, hypocritical of that. But there was so much focus on it. It was like insane. Like I can't even remember like one message where purity was not part of it, right, Marcy?
Yeah, yeah. It was hit on all the time in every session,
Yeah.
every
And it
booklet.
was And it was the cause of such anxiety for a lot of people, like, especially the thought sense, right? Of thinking about sex in any way, or thinking about somebody in a romantic way. And you had to, what was that phrase,
Take
Marcy?
captive, take captive the thought. You had to
Yes,
take
that
captive the
one.
thought. Hmm. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Take it captive and ask for
So,
the history of it having it in the first place, which is only human. But
right?
hmm
Oh yeah.
yeah,
I always find it fun when you think about that, when you tell someone not to think about something, and that's the very first thing they're gonna think about.
Yes.
Right. The
Yes.
more you tell them
Yeah.
no, the more they're going to want it. Kind of like
Yeah.
teenagers in relationships. You tell them that person's not good for them. Guess what they're going to do?
Yeah. Well, and they were saying, "Don't do this, but we're gonna bring it up every time you're around. Like, every session, we're gonna bring it up and make you think about it."
Yeah.
It's like, how am I supposed to think about it when every time we talk, it's nothing about you got to make sure you're pure and, pure in spirit and pure in body and, oh my gosh, yes.
Or my favorite is don't think about being thirsty.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Don't think about it.
That is a beautiful analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna delve into a couple of the questions for Mark, or at least one. So the first question I have is, how can I deal with dressing the way I want, like in shorts or leggings, and not internalize when men give me unwarranted comments or advances?
So in my mind, this is almost like a twofer, because one
Okay.
part is the internalized message and shame about wanting to feel comfortable and be expressive in some shape, fashion, or form. A lot of times, for some, it's just being comfortable, not going out and presenting, being alluring or attractive. And then there's the other part where it's, and to try to make sure you almost have to dress in 17 layers. I think at one session I was talking to a client and I was like, going, you could wear a box from head to toe, and if someone knows you're in there, they are going to do something like that because they want to get a rise or they want to do something. And there's the other part, and this is the one where it's almost that because you present in a way that you're automatically forced to endure this element. And both, I mean, it doesn't, if you want to dress comfortably, then part of it is learning to become relaxed in that. And that's usually the first part. And getting, so when what I was hearing at part was, how can I deal with my own negativity and shame about the message I was taught in that? And so that's one part of that. And then there's the other part where, like you were saying earlier, that these men get this free pass to be toxic, that it's okay. So it's two separate issues, but only one is really expected to handle it. And unfortunately, it's the one that's dealing with both. So I usually work with the first part because that's the only one part we can control, is how we feel and how we handle those situations. So when I'm working with somebody in that nature, the very first thing we try to do is see where that source of that shame is, and what was the last time that made them feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And what was that like for them, and how did that present, and at any point in time did that make them feel uncomfortable, and what was that like? And so we kind of have to slowly, and there's no one size fits all. So a lot of people, when they're going to listen to this, the thing I want to really caveat on all this is a very generalized element. If you are experiencing this, going to therapy and having someone speak about those specific issues, because like with a self-help book or anything, we can't be objective with ourselves. You need somebody who can be that impartial third party who can go, okay, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I understand that, but what is it that you want? Okay, then let's work our way to that and find out what is the barriers for you to feel comfortable being that expressive. So it's very, it's the internalized factor first, because that's the one we really got to work with. Because even if we get every single, I'm going to really say, moron out there who feels like they have every right to catcall or negatively put on there, you're still going to. So we have to work inside first.
So healing that the negative teaching to where you stop internalizing those thoughts of the shame and the guilt for just wearing what you're comfortable with, in a nutshell.
Right. And then there's another part to it. The negative teaching is the foundational part of it, but then you have the reinforcers.
Mm-hmm.
I knew when they said this, I didn't really believe it. They're right. It is my fault because this is happening to me. And even if
Right.
you're out of that situation, someone will end up doing it. Oh my gosh, I really am being followed by the proverbial devil. They were right. So you have that institutionalism right there of that, and then you have the constant reinforcement out until you handle that internalized factor first.
So, a little personal story. One, there's two parts to this. One, I was a teenager and I was developed very voluptuously, let's just say. And I was walking on a main highway in our town. And just being a teenager, walking down the street, there were grown men that would whistle and say, "Hey baby," out of their cars,
Yeah.
which was gross and felt very, very unsafe. So I tried to avoid the street. But also, when I was at headquarters, you remember when we would go walk down to the coffee shop in Hinsdale, Marcy?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So one of the times, a group of girls and I were all in long skirts, we're all in unrevealing tops, and we're walking down to Hinsdale to go get coffee, and there's these roofers, and
Mhm.
they start, "Hey, baby," and catcalling, all that. And it's like 5 or 6 of us, and some of the younger girls were freaking out, and I'm like, "It doesn't matter what you wear. There will be men who
Mhm.
are going to use that as a means to make you feel uncomfortable." They saw some Christian girls, because everybody that lived around there knew
Mhm.
what
Yeah, they knew
IBLP
about
was,
us.
and that
Mhm.
all of the girls that were there were the long skirt, unrevealing tops kind of girls. And so they did that purposely to make us feel uncomfortable and unsafe. And I think Mark and I had talked about this prepping for the show. It's a means of control, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a means for control. It's a means for uh, even within that little male cluster, it's who can be the more masculine ones and maybe get their attention or something. It just
Mhm.
it feeds into a negative system, and it it's very. I wish I could say it's like, oh, it's only this one group, or it's not. It's very systemic. It comes from a lot of different elements, and no, it's definitely not right. But you know, it takes a lot to undo some of that stuff, and a lot of times it has to start. It really needs to start like at home first. I hate to say it that way because it's in their little microcosm that has to start. Like, this is not acceptable behavior. You know,
Right, right. Like they may have learned it from their dad or their uncle, or, yeah, yeah.
or
And, I would say that if you are in a situation where you're getting unwanted, advances, number one, speak up for yourself. Like, "This is not okay. You are making me feel uncomfortable. You need to stop." And if they don't, leave, call the police,
yes,
do whatever you need to do to make yourself feel safe. What you wear and how you carry yourself is not the reason for some men being gross.
Yeah.
and some get reinforced from even the women in their lives that it's an acceptable thing for them to do. Um, that it's like you can't control your urges, which is a crock, but yeah.
Um, so moving on. So some of the teachings that we had were that parts of your body, your sexual organs, were sacred, right? And they were only to be revealed through marriage. And a lot of people did not learn how to utilize their organs and what they were for, and other than reproduction, right? And a lot of times the pleasure was focused on for the men, and it was transactional and procreative for women. And I experienced this myself in my first marriage, and it was devastating to feel like I did not own my own body and have a right to say no. So first and foremost, you have a right to say no, even if you are not married. And I know we've talked about this, and even if you are married or not married, you have a right to say no to your partner. If you're not feeling it, you're not in the mood, you know, maybe a conversation is warranted right then and there. Maybe a conversation is warranted at another time.
Yeah.
But you have the right to say no. Consent is valid even in marriage.
And even in the middle of the act too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep, at any, and gosh, this is a conversation that I've had with my kids for so long, and I'm like, even if in the moment and there's penetration, if someone changes their mind, that is a hard no, and it stops. I don't care what's you go to the bathroom, you figure out what you need to do for yourself, and then you respect that person's no, no matter what, because you don't know why that no is coming. It could be something traumatic happened to them, and this act has surfaced some trauma. It could be something was painful and they don't know how to express it. So you have to respect the no, go take care of yourself if you need to, and then come have a conversation, right?
Correct.
Okay, so speaking of that, I think there's a good question that we have a little bit on that topic. So speaking of like your sexual awakening, right? Like somebody said, like, was it normal to have like a sexual awakening at 14? Because it
Mhm.
was often taught that sexual awakening did not happen until marriage unless it was a sin. You were doing something in a sinful way.
Yeah. So it matters what you mean by sexual awakening. If you're talking about developing actual sexualized feelings, a lot of studies have shown that we start having pleasurable sensations that can lead to orgasm, usually 1 to 2 years after the onset of puberty. So then it's the difference between like sensuality and sexuality. So with sensuality being just the ability to receive pleasure, whether or not that's orgasmic in nature, I mean, we have anyone who's had little kids sees that they're touching themselves, and a lot of times they're too young to notice the difference. And interesting, we actually have some ultrasound sound pictures of showing babies actually touching themselves in utero. So it's kind of like, okay, well, they experience these pleasure elements. So if we want to talk about sexual awakening, then if we're dealing with just the biology where we're talking about orgasmic type of behaviors, then it's typically 1 to 2 years after the onset of puberty. So whenever those hormones start and release, and we start developing those sexual characteristics, then that can then lead up to what that the sexual element. And then you also have cultural expectations and societal expectations. But if we're just talking about pure biology, it's usually 1 to 2 years after the onset of puberty.
So, and I think a lot of times in our culture, it's not, we don't talk about it, but like one day you might wake up and be like, oh, that person's attractive. And you never saw, someone of the opposite sex or, same sex, gender, whatever, attractive before. And then, so I think also the awakening of you are a sexual being and you have attraction as well. And I would say, in my opinion, it usually happens around puberty when your hormones are raging.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It definitely kicks it up a notch.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Me, I was boy crazy by the time I was like, I don't know, 9. I don't know.
which is not unheard of. Yeah, for cisgendered women, it's usually puberty is onset around age 10. So that wouldn't be surprising.
So one of the topics that we wanted to also discuss was virginity. Now,
Mhm.
me personally, I don't even know if I agree with the concept of virginity anymore
No.
because what constitutes a virgin, right? Like, is kissing, touching, foreplay, all the bases except for home base, penetrative sex, what constitutes when you're no longer a virgin? And I think it's an arbitrary term that, is determined by, um, your own teachings and thoughts on it, and I think it can be different for everyone, and I don't really like the term, but for the purposes of this conversation and some of our questions, we're gonna go ahead and I guess virginity being penetrative sex. That's what, for the sake of this conversation, we'll kind of equate it to that, right?
Okay.
So in our culture, it was in our community, the purity culture, it was very often virginity was taught to be currency. The only value a woman had to get a good husband was if she was not given away her virginity, whether it was consensual or not consensual. And some of the godforsaken examples they would give us were, it's like chewing a piece of gum. If you give away your virginity, you can't put the gum back in the pack. It's chewed up, it's no more good, and it eventually loses its flavor. Or the stupid crumpled up paper. You can't uncrumple a paper. Once it's crumpled, you can't go back. So, once you give that flower away, you're tarnished for the rest of your life, and you'll just be lucky to get somebody that is going to be okay with that, right?
Right.
So,
They
what
even
are some go ahead.
go ahead. I was going to say, in some situations, they even said that could contract. It would cause health problems later.
No.
They had no basis for that. It had no science behind it, but they did tell women that.
It wasn't like you're gonna get an STD. Like, they
No,
wouldn't or
no,
STI or anything like that. It would just be like,
no.
you're gonna have abdominal pain for the rest of your life, or you're
Yeah,
gonna contract some kind of cancer or something because
yeah,
the judgment of God's gonna be upon you. Like some arbitrary,
mm-hmm,
non-scientific, you know,
mm-hmm.
illness that can be attributed to a mountain of things other than the
Yes,
sin of losing your virginity.
yes.
Yeah. I always like what they considered the test measure for which was normally the hymen. They're like, going, if the hymen's intact, then you're still a virgin. But the problem with that is hymens can be broken in any number of ways. And the other element is, which is slightly different. Some individuals don't have their hymens break incredibly early, or I guess you could say, for in a sense of the purity culture, is the lucky few whose hymens able to just pop back. And they're like, oh, well, you're still a virgin, even though they probably have had intercourse like thousands of times. It's still, so that is kind of an arbitrary rule, and it is an element of control. And then the other thing I usually say is, well, okay, we have this test bed for women, but what about men? What's that test bed like, and what does that look like? So it is an element of control, and and the loss of virginity can come in so many different fashions or forms depending on your perspectives and viewpoints.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to tell. So it's not really that. Yeah, it's one of those things that's like, okay, you know what? If we got rid of the element of what virginity is and actually start talking about elements of how to protect our health and safety, and how to make sure that those key points, what virginity was, that concept to protect us from, was present, but we still had a way of doing that, it would be a lot easier. So I think that's where proper sexual education period comes in, because there's been studies that show that even with sexual education, the likelihood of a group delaying sex doesn't change. However, their uses of protective measures to reduce pregnancy and STIs do increase. So sex
So it's
education,
not necessarily
yeah,
a factor of preventing it. It's a factor of doing it safely and knowing what your body does. It's another one. Phantom X11 says, you know, it never occurred to me while growing up that these lessons were supposed to be only for women. I thought they applied to me just as much, which is awesome because, you know, a lot of times we don't get the male perspective when it comes to these teachings. And what we hear as women a lot is that when a man fails, it is our fault. We were the one that led them into sin because of the way that we dressed. Because you know what happens is if we get caught doing something, they ask us, well, what were you wearing? What were you doing? Did you bend down next to them? Did you wink at them? You know, like these are like questions that women are asked when there is some kind of and I don't know if they're asked to men because I've never been in the conversation, but it is often very um one-sided in whose fault it is when those conversations. And you know, it would be great to hear from a man's perspective who's, you know, had conversations about their sin of, you know, premarital sex or whatever, and or if, you know, they were unfortunately the victim of abuse, how that was handled with the community as a male person, because a lot of the experiences that I've heard are mostly women, and it always is discussed how bad they felt because they felt like it was their fault. And it's very common even outside of this community for the person who was abused, whether it be male or female, to feel like it's their fault. But I feel like in our experience, it is like doubled down by the leadership because it's
yeah.
taught that way.
What I was thinking while you're talking about this was that also we don't know, because a lot of times the students were separated when they were having the sessions that would speak on this sort of thing at the conferences and the trainings and the things. The boys were taken to one room, the girls were taken to another room. We were both taught different things. So it's really good for us to hear the guy's side of what they were being taught, because I only ever heard the girl stuff. We weren't allowed in there. And I didn't have any guy friends and that would never have been discussed between girls and guys in that situation. So it's good to know and to understand what you guys were subjected to too, because all we have reference for is what we were taught in our sessions.
Yeah, it was very separated.
I did have one a male client who, this is a long time ago, who was from a purity culture element and was discovered of having impure thoughts, and the punishments were sometimes for them, it just mattered on who caught them at that time and what was going on. So for this particular, yeah, I mean, he was locked in a very small area in a very to sweat out his impurity.
That is actually a common thing that I've heard about, like Indie and
Yeah.
all of the other youth things. Indie was a hotel in Indianapolis, and they had like I don't know, like a
They had prayer rooms. They would lock them in prayer rooms.
yeah, lock you in prayer rooms, and it could be for any number of things. And then, okay, so Phantom said, unfortunately, I can't speak to that. I am asexual, so having one of those conversations never came up. And then Ashley had said, it's so disturbing and gross that some and within purity culture consider a victim of rape or other sexual assault to be impure. So disgusting. I agree with you for sure. It needs to stop. That's, they need to recognize that the person at fault is the one who did the harm, not the one who was harmed.
And that's actually a double power play on those as well, because you have the purity element, then you have this assault, which a lot of times you can't. Well, I'm not going to say can't. They're not able to say no. They are, and then you have that victim blaming, and then it's you entice them to do this. You cause them. No, it's a. Since I work a lot on assault traumas and sexual assault traumas and stuff like that, yes, even outside of this, it's awful. It's absolutely, yeah.
And it's not selective to just this community of fundamentalists recovering from cult and stuff. It's very common in the United States itself, in our country, where women are blamed for, anything that happens to them when it's unwarranted. You must have wanted it is a lot of, why were you at a bar, at 2:00 in the morning drinking drinks? Well, because I enjoyed hanging out with my friends and we got separated, or somebody roofied me, it's ridiculous how much the victim gets blamed in our society, in and out of the cult.
Yes.
So another question we had, and it kind of goes, I think, along with this, is how to deal with the identity shame of women being inferior. And a lot of times it was preached that women were the lesser people, or were the what was the term? Weaker vessel.
The weaker vessel. Yes, they're
Right.
weaker of mind, weaker of determination, or they couldn't control their impulses as well.
Right? Like, we are the ones that can't control impulse or our emotions, right? We were too emotional, right? So how do you deal with identity shame? Women being inferior can cause sin, the men to sin based on our body type and how we dress.
That goes back to a little bit what we were talking about before, is that that message gets passed, and then it's generational and culturally and religiously reinforced and all that. And when you deal with that and you finally come out of those suppressive or repressive type environments, the thing that we definitely need to kind of like work on first is reclaiming the fact that you're in a safe place. So like what I'm working with prior to COVID, when I had my office set up, my office was strictly set up for primarily around sexual trauma survivors. So the way my couch was, if someone opened the door, they couldn't see who it is because the door would block them. They would see me. I was able to get through, but I was always, they were actually in between. So they always had that power to get up and leave if they wanted to and stuff. So it was very set up to that. So one of the things that's very important, at least from my perspective, doing this, is that first of all, the person feels safe in the environment. Because when you're not feeling safe anywhere, a lot of times, even in your own home, you need to get that safe space first, because you can't get through to that working on that. And so for them to see that element where they can start accepting the realization. And one of the things I try to say is, you're obviously strong enough because you're here. Mm-hmm. And it's allowing that person to first recognize that they do have, because they've been told they're powerless the entire time. Mm-hmm. Everything they do is, so to finally hear a message. So we have to start doing it bit by bit, slowly, piece by piece. And there's always going to be a back step. And that's the thing, especially in this, is I always tell my clients, we're expecting a back step not because there's a problem. It's because as we learn and go forward and trust ourselves, something's going to shake us a little bit, and we go back to our last coping strategy that worked for us, which is sometimes not the most constructive. But as long as we get it piece by piece up, you don't drop as far. So it is one of those things of understanding that personal strength and showing them first through the process of having that safe environment and that trust environment to where a person's going to listen. And if you are lucky enough to be in an area where there is a group where people can share that, how strong, even if it's just telling themselves in the mirror, I'm not to blame. It doesn't sound like much, but it's little foundational pieces. So when it comes to that, breaking that inferiority and those elements, we really got to concentrate. Positive psychology, person-centered. There's so many different modalities that we could work on in this, but the method I always think is first safe, realizing they have say, they have control, especially in a therapy situation. So I think that's where therapy can really be helpful, is to show them that they can be safe.
So it boils down to finding your safe place, number one, first. And then we always recommend working with a therapist for dismantling those inner thoughts that you're struggling with and reframing them in a more healthy way. So I'm going to ask you, Mark, real quick to address this comment, because I don't know, you were here when I was talking about my experience at headquarters. Well, you see, men can control themselves as long as women dress appropriately. That's just science. Mark, what do you think?
I do not care if, and this is, so I have a son and a daughter, and I have told them this since the day they were born. I do not care if you go running up on the streets completely without a stitch on. No one has a right to touch you or say anything negative or have access to your body, period. I don't care what it is. If you need to have that element of saying it's that victim, oh, they enticed me, why couldn't you tell yourself no? I can guarantee you, if you have a problem telling yourself no, that's a you issue. Because the element of not regulating your own mood and control, a lot of times when we have other elements like that, those people end up in jail, or sometimes not even being allowed back in school or anything. So just this one place, no one has that element, and that's where consent comes in, and learning the element of consent. And consent, it's men.
So it boils down to, it does not matter what you wear. You can be in a thong and just your nipples covered on the beach, and if a man approaches you and tries to touch you, he is wrong. Or you can be a man in a thong Speedo, and if a woman is trying to touch you, she is wrong. Sure, there is biological things that happen when you see an attractive person, but being attracted to them and forcing yourself upon them is two completely different things.
Absolutely correct.
So I would have to disagree with you that it's not science. That's abuse.
Your biological response to it is science. Your actions is not.
Correct. Let's see. Okay, so one of the topics we wanted to kind of discuss was sexual desires and interacting in a relationship. So one of the people talked about this ambiguous 72-hour rule that some people were taught, that a man cannot go without sex for more than 72 hours. And as a wife or a partner, that you were supposed to be constantly ready to have sexual interaction if your husband wanted it. Because if you didn't, that would lead to him being enticed to do things like go into porn addiction or go cheat on you or have randos for sexual partners, and it would be your fault. So one of the things I wanted to say was sexual desire does not have a formula. It is different for everyone, and your frequency of sex is going to vary with partners and yourself, and it could also be dictated by medical situations and or hormonal fluctuations.
True. When I hear the 72-hour rule, the thing is I would say the human race would have never have evolved, because first of all, a lot of those young pubescent boys never had elements like that. And, if, God forbid, you end up with the flu or a cold or anything, we would have died out. So
plus in biblical times, as the Bible states, a woman was supposed to be put away for her cycle. And so there was a whole 7 freaking days, 5 to 7 days that they didn't get any. So I'm just saying.
Yeah.
It's not even biblical.
It's this justification of why I can do what I want to do kind of deal. And it's not, hogwash.
So with that, we have a question from Mark. It's kind of a two-parter.
Okay.
What does a healthy sexual relationship look like? How can we, and I believe this was a male asking, how can we create an intimate, satisfying, and validating environment for our partner within our relationship?
So what does a healthy sexual relationship look like? So the short answer that I consider kind of universal and what my focus is, it's about, first of all, it is respecting your partner. And everyone's like, well, I'm due respect. No, respect is given and you hope respect is returned. And then the other element is communication. And, people are like, oh, well, if we fight, or people are going to have arguments. They're going to have disagreements. My wife and I have been together 27 years. And if you all think that we didn't have not had a fight, an argument, a disagreement, then you know what? I got several acres of land in the middle of the Atlantic to sell you at a going price. Okay. So what it is, it's one of those things. It's not about the arguments. It's not about the fights. It's about how you deal with them afterwards and how to handle. That's what defines it. So working on that conflict and working on that respect and the elements that I also bring in any relationship, like if we're dealing with a standard, like 2-partnered relationship, the way I always view it is there is partner A, partner B in the relationship. So there's technically 3. And so what's good for one person and what's good for the other might not necessarily be good within the relationship. So learning to communicate what you each need, not only to each other as human beings, but also as partners in that relationship. And then when it comes to, when it comes to those fights, a lot of times we have to understand that we are looking, a lot of people, so you might have had an argument and you're thinking, oh, this is resolved. And then all of a sudden your next fight comes up and the issue is brought back up. And you're like, I thought we fixed that. There's the intellectual piece and then there's the emotional piece. A lot of times we fix the intellectual piece, but we don't address the emotional piece. And sometimes that's where a couples counseling or even dealing with our own individual issues can help with that. And then the other element that I would kind of integrate a little bit is the understanding of the differences between intimacy, sensuality, and sexuality. And so intimacy can be in many different things. It's just that connection and you can have intimacy without sensuality or sexuality. I know a lot of people who have a lot of sexuality with no intimacy or sensuality. They just do what they want to do. And then there are people like we had the person talking about being asexual who want the intimacy. They want that relationship piece. They just don't want the sexual piece, which is perfectly valid and it's okay. So when it comes to what does a healthy sexual relationship looks like, it's when you both can communicate, you both have that consent, you both have that mutual respect, and you both understand that you're not always going to be in sync, and having very clear communication of what sex looks like. And there's a running joke I have with clients and stuff. It's about flannel pajamas. And the concept of flannel pajamas is when so in the story, the husband is laying on the couch watching TV. The wife comes in with her flannel pajamas on and stares at the husband and says, well, I'm going to bed. Oh, looks at her. Oh, okay. I'm just going to finish watching this and I'll be back in bed in a minute. She's like, okay. Stands there for a minute, looks, turns around, goes to bed. Okay. Next morning, she's throwing things in the dishes. What's going on? Well, I was in the mood and you didn't come. You were dressed to toe in flannels. So every time you're wearing flannels, I'm supposed to know you're in the mood? Like, no. Yeah. So it's the flannel pajama element. So what communication, consent, mutual respect, and just sometimes being there for the partner. That's the other one. And just as we get older, our bodies will start betraying us and stuff like. So it's just, I guess the other part
Lots
is
to navigate.
Oh yeah, have fun.
Yes.
That's the big. If you both are having fun and you're both communicating, you both can laugh. That's usually a good element to it. Not the key element always, but it's a good element.
Well, that's good. That's very good advice. So now that you did mention the asexuality, let's go ahead with the earlier comment. Is purity culture a major factor in being asexual?
No. There has been studies that show that asexuality can be sometimes hormone related. Sometimes it doesn't have to be. Some people, I mean, if we look at it from a sense of people saying, well, I was born gay, born bi, people are born sometimes asexual. And sometimes they can have little bouts of libido, but it's not a governing force. And a lot of times they will go along with their partner just to kind of, yeah, okay, I want that connection. But now, could there be an element of it? If there is, I have not seen a lot of research done in it. But does it mean that it doesn't exist? It just means I have not seen it. There are also different elements of asexual as well. So it's a very large encompassing pool, but I have not seen anything directly correlating at this moment to it.
So if somebody is asexual and they are completely happy with where they're at in their relationship, is satisfying, nothing much to do other than continue to exist, right? If
Correct.
you find yourself to be asexual and you're not happy with that factor, my suggestion would be first and foremost, medical. Go to a medical professional, find out if there is something medically happening that is contributing to that asexual factor. And I would also consider maybe finding an amazing sex therapist like the one we have here. He may not be able to treat you. He can't treat you here for sure. But there are resources where you can find a certified sex therapist that can help you work through those things if you feel like it's something that needs to be resolved. or worked on or adjusted in any way, shape, or form.
And I will say that there is a difference between a person who, if you like look them up online and they have on their profile that they do sex therapy, and the ones that are certified. Those of us who are certified by a organizational body, and you can easily ask them who is your certifying body, and they will be able to tell you. And some have been around for several years. Some are relatively new. Are the relatively new ones necessarily bad? It just means the relatively new ones means there hasn't been enough members and there hasn't been enough on there to show an element. But also on the other side of it, just because there's somebody that's certified doesn't mean they're necessarily great. I'll tell you though that a lot of times with certifying bodies, they have ethics and rules committees set up that if a complaint is filed and they investigate, they can lose their certification because of that. And so yeah, there's rules.
Do your research, right?
Do your research. When in doubt, call them up. The biggest key thing I will tell you about any good therapist, in my opinion, is they work for you. And if you two are not a good fit, they will not take it personally. If they do start taking it personally, big old red flag, get out. Because a professional ethical therapist is going to go, okay, they might go, can we at least talk about it?
Yeah.
Or they'll say, you know what, I see it too. You know what, here's some names. And I'm not always the best fit for people. That's perfectly okay. Mm-hmm. So the thing is I'll say, okay, well, here's some names. I do want you to get your help. I want you to reach your goals. If they don't work and they can't help you find somebody, come back to me and ask me for more names.
Yeah.
I don't even have to see you as a client anymore. However, I will try to help find a good fit.
A good fit. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're at the hour mark, but there was one more question that I felt like was really, really important for us to address before we leave. Sure. And so with someone who has been through extensive therapy, someone that's done like cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR therapy, if they are still having trouble with the negative emotions, feelings, and reactions to touch, because a lot of our survivors have experienced touch in a negative way through corporal punishment or abuse or being groomed by the leader of our cult. What are so that let's see, how does someone heal from being from that concept of the negative experience of touch, where their body and brain reacts to physical touch, where they're like, I guess, triggered into that fight, flight, or freeze state?
So it, once again, always matters with that individual and that person's story and that person's direction. And if they're already in a otherwise healthy, safe relationship, that can make it a little bit more, it adds a little easier of an element to help with that. But the thing I like to tell people in that they might have had extensive amount of therapy, it doesn't mean that those therapy necessarily failed. Sometimes we are not ready for certain areas. There could have been a disconnect between that person and the therapist they were with. And we inadvertently start putting up walls that we might not be aware of. And it doesn't manifest till another point in time. The thing I would say, though, is if you are constantly you're going and seeing different therapists who are really, like, say they're EMDR, and you've gone to see 15 different types of EMDR or even 5, the thing that might be is maybe EMDR is not that type of therapy for you. A lot of us are trained in multiple modalities. Even in grad school, we're trained in multiple modalities. And some of us, and I include myself in this, is that if I'm not seeing like a progressive change, or where I start asking questions. Not only I primarily ask it to myself first. It's like, first thing I do is I'll go looking through my, am I missing something? Is there a question I'm not asking or exploring or whatnot? The other thing I might go is I might revisit an issue. Like, okay, we haven't talked about this in a while and it's been a little bit of time. What's your thoughts on this? Or have you thought about it anymore? What comes up? So the thing when it comes down to it, when we're having a reaction to that, I have set like things I ask depending on the person, what therapy they've already received, where they're at in their life journey, what's going on within their. I look at different factors, and based on that, I start building up that clinical profile, that treatment plan, and everything, and I start asking questions. Now, I will say this: if I'm working with somebody who has come out of a very toxic environment, like going with a cult environment or purity culture or abusive sexual relationship, I am not going to go and jump in and go, okay, so tell me why you're having problems with penetrative sex. No. I might start off going, okay, have you seen a doctor first? And has the doctor cleared you? Because there could be some hormonal issues. There could be some of this. Then I might go, okay, well, how do you deal with in building that therapeutic relationship first? Because we're talking about a very sensitive topic. Also, and maybe this is my experience in it, for some reason with me being male presenting and working with, I have a lot of women coming to me, or cisgender, even some trans men, trans women. And we talk about this. The thing that it is always, you're safe, you're in control. You can tell me, Mark, I don't want to talk about this issue today. I might go, okay, but can we possibly talk about it next session, or at least talk about what you're feeling next session? I don't want to open it up right now. You said no, I'm going to honor that no. Mm-hmm. But can we at least address what you felt next time? Mm-hmm. And sometimes not ready next time, but they are the time after that. Because and the reason is because they're still testing, do I still have say and do I still have control?
Mm-hmm.
So I might bring it up next session and they might say, you know what, I'm not ready for that. I'm like, okay, but just like we did last time, is it possible to talk about next one? Yeah, because they're testing me. Mm-hmm. They need to test me.
Right. They need to see that you are going to respect a boundary that they lay out, because none of their boundaries typically have been respected by anyone in their lives. So, yes, absolutely. Testing your therapist to see if they are trustworthy is very important. And if they're not going to respect your boundaries, they are not a safe person to do therapy with. And I would say, in this case, maybe the therapy that you have been doing has been uncovering layers of the deconstruction that hasn't delved into this topic. Possibly it's something that you might want to consider reaching out to a certified sex therapist to talk about your reactions to touches and stuff. And if there's any healing that can be done on top of all of the other healing that you've done. I think that when it comes to someone who has been violated in that way, sometimes in my experience in dealing with this community, I've seen that that's kind of the last layer of healing that gets done, is that physical healing from the negative touch that they received.
And the other thing I'll add is sometimes it's not the therapist that, or even the client that missed something. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's certain situations that are so buried in our psyche that it's not until a certain combination has been hit for it to come out. Sometimes a smell, a sound, or a combination of them, all of a sudden it activates something that wasn't even known. So we can't automatically assume that there was a failure on anyone's part,
right?
Because a lot of times these traumas are, or these these kickoff points are layered in multiples. The human brain is both fascinating and also sometimes the most disturbing things on the planet, because it protects itself so well by sometimes burying itself. And it's, yeah. So that the biggest thing I say should be a takeaway in all of this is it was a journey for you to get to that point. It was another journey for you to escape that point. And then it's another journey to heal from that point. And all of it, it's still a journey.
Yeah, there's no time limit on it.
There's no time limit.
And
I was going to say,
yeah.
Shame
should not be part of it. Shame, in the healing part of the journey, shame is the first thing that needs to be kicked out of your head and heart. Guilt and shame, those, because that's what's been programmed into all of it, is you should feel guilty, you should feel ashamed, you should, no, it's, those should be out the door first.
What were you going to say, Marcy?
I was just going to say that I'm relating to this in some ways because I've gone through several different types of counseling, kind of like she had, and that it's like like layers of an onion. We've talked about that before, where you got to get it through one, and sometimes there has to be a space of time from one layer to the next, and even like I went through a volunteer type of therapy. And I didn't think it worked at all. In fact, I left very angry. So I was like, this was supposed to help me, and it didn't. And they showed me some statistics from the beginning to the end, and it showed that there had been improvement, but I didn't feel emotionally that there had been. But then it took me some time away from that therapy before I was able to say, you know what? I think maybe it did make a little bit of difference. And sometimes it's just a little bit, and that takes you 2 steps forward to what you need to do next. Also, the other biggest thing was the safety thing, where I could not make progress at all until I was in a place of safety. And that took time for my circumstances to change and for there to be time between the event and counseling. And so, and like he said, it has to be like this perfect combination of different things and time, and you never really quite know how that's going to shift together. And sometimes you think that what doesn't work is actually working, but you just can't see it right then. So yes, all those things.
Well, you said something that's very important in that, and that is the safety. And the first thing, and it's something that we've talked about the entire time, is that you, especially women in this, have been told that they are causing all these things. So you can't even feel safe in yourself.
Yeah.
And that goes back to what we have to start with feeling safe within ourselves, feeling safe within our judgment, feeling safe that we are capable of being safe. And that is, so that's the other thing is, as you're going through this, that's why I always focus on that element first. I've been trained in several different types of trauma styles, and one of them is actually dealing with relaxation, polyvagal theory, and that is learning how the vagus nerve systems help regulate and calm and relax and release. I view it as more as a tool to be integrated. Some are like hardcore. I think it's a tool to be integrated, but it's one of those things. Feeling comfortable and safe within ourselves first allows us to start, especially when it comes to the elements of intimacy and sexuality, is necessary, because and I know with the questions there was stuff that led into all those elements as well, but there is a reason why that being relaxed helps with that element as well.
So I guess what I took away from that is, number one, you have to evaluate if there is anything within yourself that you're not feeling safe about. Number two, evaluate your relationships. Are there anything in your romantic relationships or other relationships that are causing these triggers, and that you're not feeling 100% safe within those? And then obviously, maybe it's just an internal dialogue that you're having with yourself, or a trauma response that you need to assess with a therapist, sex therapist, cognitive behavioral therapist, EMDR therapist, whatever one that you think, or try them all. You never know. One might be the one to unlock that. You never know.
Exactly.
I think also it may be something that you may never heal from, because the trauma was just so deep. And, you know, don't pressure yourself to be more healed than you're ready to be.
That is also a big cause, is the I should be here by now.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
is your own worst enemy. Oh, I had a friend who got out of this situation and they're already here. Why can't I be here? Everyone's journey is different. And the thing that sometimes we have to understand and realize is that the messages that we have received, if they're even partially reinforced, makes it a little more challenging to I don't want to say undo, because here's the thing.
Dismantle.
There's, and I think we sometimes get a negative concept when it comes to a person, especially coming out of a religious or a cultural cult factor, is that some lessons that they learn still are with them and still they appreciate and they carry on. But if we're telling them constantly everything about this is wrong, then you're not.
Mm-hmm.
There might be some lessons that are of value to them still. And I think that if you're having someone who is actively listening and not placing judgment on there, that's the other key thing with therapists, is like, oh my gosh, you're in a cult. Well, everything they did to you was wrong. Wait a second. Where are you to say that? Maybe some of the stuff, yes, but I still value these couple things that came from that. It could have been family members. It could have been children. It could be a certain way of looking at one type of issue that stays true. So and that might be the biggest block for, because I have one person in my head, I remember this very clearly. It was because I never once told them what you believe is wrong. I want you to tell me what it is that you need help navigating through. Never once am I going to tell you how you should feel, how you should be, how you should behave. Oh, you don't like that aspect. Okay, so let's see what it is that you want. And sometimes it's not even the therapist that says it. So I don't want to say, oh, the therapist. It's sometimes somebody else in their life that they value says something that an element that they still hold on to is wrong. And that's another reason why. So we're looking at this big wide element, and everyone has their own different journey and everyone has their own element. But it's that trust, that respect, and that mutual element of safety and respecting your own safety and trusting your own judgment that allows that element to come through. So while not everything is right, sometimes some things are right.
Yeah. And like we've said this on our podcast quite a few times, is that everybody is not at the same place of healing, and they're not in the same place of beliefs. And some people don't consider IBLP, ATI a cult. We do. There is no, like we've discussed on the podcast before, there is no definition of what a cult is.
Right.
And we believe what we were in was a cult. But if you don't feel that way, we don't judge you for that. Number one. And number two, if you hold to some of those beliefs, we won't judge you here. We are giving our experience from our perspective, and it's okay for y'all to have a different perspective and have a different journey. There's many roads in our country, right? And multiple roads can lead to the same point. It's not about comparison either. I think Mark and I had talked about that prepping, is a lot of times, veterans have a tendency to compare their journey to other people's journeys. And I think it's just an inherently human to, well, this person's doing this, so I should be this, and I mean, even in our community, comparison is unwise, right? Like it's in the Bible. But
yeah, especially if it's used as a way of governing where you should be when, especially in a topic like this, that everyone's life journey is different. And I think that is when it comes to any of it, if it goes back to that whole element of respect, consent, communication, those are going to be the biggest, and a lot of those have to be within ourselves. We have to respect ourselves. We have to be willing to give ourselves consent to be okay not being okay.
Yeah.
Or even, you know what, I'm feeling really good, even if it's only for a moment. I'm going to embrace being okay for that moment. It's okay. So it's focus on the journey, not necessarily the end goal. The other thing I tell clients all the time is, you're in the driver's seat, I have the map, and I can always take a different route. It's just, you tell me where you want me to take it, tell me where you want to go. You decide how fast we go, and if we need to make a rest stop or anything else. So that's how it, at least that's how I operate and how I was trained to operate. So
yeah, that's amazing, and that's awesome. So we are a little over time, but that's okay, because this was important. But I have to say that we did already preemptively ask Marc, if he would join us again if we didn't have time to fit everything in, which with this topic, do you ever fit everything in? We do have some more questions and some more topics that we want to discuss. So look forward to another episode with me, Marcy, and Marc. With that, Marcy, do you have any closing thoughts for our community?
No, I felt like Marc summed it up beautifully.
Thank you.
So, I did kind of have a few closing thoughts that I wrote out. So I'm gonna read this off to y'all. So if it looks like I'm reading something, it's because I am. These are my personal thoughts when I thought about how I was going to close out this episode, and I just want to say that women and men alike, you are in control of your body, and you have a right to deny even your partner access to it. Boundaries and communication are important to any healthy relationship. Your partner's sexual desires are not a reflection of your worth, value, or appearance. No is a complete sentence. Communicating the reason you may or may not want sex will help your partner understand where you are. It is important to make a safe space for you and your partner to share your desires and fantasies. I always recommend therapy for those that are struggling with the myriad of challenges that come with leaving the teachings of the cult and or high control group. It is up to you to determine what is acceptable for your life and no one else, not even us. There are always compromises in a relationship, but they should never make you feel guilt, shame, or like you are repressing your true self. You are valuable, you have worth, and no matter what you have been through, none of it can take that away. So, those are my thoughts.
One thing I'd like to add on that is, no one is owed access to your body.
Correct. So, with that, we are going to close this episode. And if someone has not told you ever or today, we are proud of you. And we will do our little extra, and then we will see you on the next episode, whenever that may be. Y'all have a great night.